Sorry, you
Heather.
can't see our happy face, Bob, and we can't see yours, but they're working on it. So hopefully you can hear us anyway. The first item of business, roll call, please, sorry.
Yes. Sorry, Chair Walker,
Here,
Vice Chair Hill, Committee Member Patil. Mr. Sleeth is here. Okay, Member Skolnick is excused. Mayor Lewis. Vice Mayor Holland.
I just got a note, she's running.
great. Okay, so now our first item of business is, are there any public comments that anyone would like to make? Bob, I believe you can unmute if you have any.
Echo. Or mute.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, George. Okay, well, hearing none, we will go on, but if I don't, if later on people appear and they can see us and we can hear them, I should ask again if they have public comment. So our first item is to approve the minutes of our last meeting, which was on November 12th. I have reviewed them and I'm happy with them. Does anybody else have any comments or questions on the November 12th minutes?
It was a nice summary of.
Yes, thank you, Robert. Then I would ask for a move to approve. Second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion passes unanimously. Oh, did we have two sets of, wait a minute. I'm looking, where am I looking?
That's the minutes page you're looking at.
Oh, wow.
That's fine.
I thought I was losing my mind. Thank you. Thank you for setting me straight.
You're welcome.
Okay, yeah, you turn 70, you never know what's going to happen next. Okay, but now for the welcome, Stacy.
Hi.
Welcome, Wally. We really just started. We had a little bit of delay for technology stuff, so all we've done is called it to order and approve minutes. So not a big. And we're now to the main event, which is item 2, a presentation by GovInvest. And Robert, could you please introduce our guest and welcome him?
Please, will do. And real quick, want to introduce our new council member on the committee. Our Vice Mayor Holland is.
Glad to have you, Stacy.
Nice to learn. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair Walker. Before you is item number 2. Today is the presentation by GovInvest. It's the review and discussion of the town's Atherton 2024 actuarial evaluation. This is of our post-employment healthcare program that the town provides. At the end, if appropriate, just recommend adoption of the evaluation report. Real quick, the town provides pension benefits, pension defined benefits through CalPERS pension system, but also we offer other post-employment benefits, which is short for OPEB, short for that. And these benefits is retiree health medical that we provide to employees that have retired with the town. Just real quick, in the staff report, over the years, we have reduced and eliminated the retirement health care for future retirees. That was done back in 2000. So this actuarial evaluation report includes that information. Recall we performed a evaluation in 2022 that we reviewed. And then last year we did a roll forward refresh as of June 2020 for the required for us to do a roll refresh every other year, and then every 2 years we do a full OPEB evaluation. So without further ado, I'd like to present Roger Burton from GovInvest. He's here to present our evaluation report. He's the chief actuary with GovInvest. Results. We do have a PowerPoint presentation that was included in your packet. I can pull it.
Oh, excellent.
So without further ado, like, to
Welcome, Roger. Thank you for joining us.
Right. So as mentioned, my name is Roger Burton. I'm actually the chief actuary for Precision Actuarial, which subcontracts to GovInvest. We do a lot of their GASB reporting. Their company mainly focuses on the software. So we've been with them from the start, providing GASB reports for them. So I just wanted to make sure I wasn't taking credit for being
correct, yes.
chief actuary of GovInvest.
Yes, that's what GASB stands for,
GASB,
Government
yeah.
County Standards
Yeah,
Board, GASB 75.
Feel free to raise a hand if you have any questions as I go along. So the presentation here is a summary of the GASB 75 report. GASB 75, Government Accounting Standards Board, statement number 75 covers retiree benefits, other than pension. So as Robert mentioned, health, dental, vision, life insurance if you offer it. So I'll go through the presentation, which again is a summary, and then I've looked at the GASB 75 report. Happy to answer any questions about also. So a little bit about the valuation benefits. Talked about this, that anything other than pensions, you only offer the health benefits, so you don't have to worry about the life insurance. There's no pension or severance pay in this report. Okay, so what goes into evaluation? Benefit provisions, your plan, what you offer, healthcare assumptions, cost of claims, trends, economic assumptions like inflation, investment return, trust funds. Demographic assumptions would be population of active employees and retirees. And also the assumptions about them, such as, are they going to draw or be terminated, or they qualify for benefits? Are they going to, when are they going to retire? And once they retire, how long until we expect them to die? Mortality. So I just went through all of those. So it does mention that you do subsidize the healthcare. Obviously, that's why you have it. There's an exception to that, but I won't go. Healthcare assumptions. So again, these are the costs, trends, economic assumptions, discount rate. That's something we can talk about. If you are a pay-as-you-go plan, not have a trust fund, have to use a lower interest rate to value liability. Familiar with the time value of money, a lower interest rate means a higher liability. Have more in your account to fund something in the future because it's growing at a slower rate. So the higher the interest rate or discount rate is, lower your liability. Because you have a trust fund, GASB says you're allowed to use higher discount rate, expected rate of return on your trust fund. So that benefits the town. And okay, I mentioned all the decrements there. Any questions on any of those? All right. Valuation results. Okay, so according to GASB, we have to measure your liability every 2 years. And so every 2 years, we get a new census and we run the valuation on a person-by-person basis. We look at every person and say, what's the probability they're going to retire this year? And if they're retired, what's the probability that they're going to still be alive? What's their benefit? How long is it going to last? And use annuities and tools like that to project it forward. And we use that discount rate to value it back to say how much would you have to have in the bank account today to fund that. So we
Is
do
that
that.
done strictly on a statistical basis as opposed to surveying employees and saying when do you?
Strictly statistical.
Strictly statistical,
Yeah,
thank you.
that
That's what I
would
thought.
be too much work to survey employees. It'd be maybe more accurate, maybe not. Depends on how well they stick to what they say. So we do that every 2 years. And in between, we do what's called a roll forward valuation. where we take those valuation results and we mathematically roll it forward a year. We projected it forward. This is a full valuation, so we have a new census. So see changes because census changed, and your census is your list of employees and retirees. This is measured as of same date, June 30th, 2024. Measurement date can be different. In your case, it's the same, which is nice. Makes things simpler. Discount rate. Your discount rate increased from 6 to 6.3% due to favorable economic performance, I guess you'd say. Your expected rate of return has gone up a little bit. Okay, so
Could I ask you to
Yes.
get a
Oh.
little closer to the mic?
Of
We're
course.
having a little bit of trouble hearing you and people online may.
okay.
That's
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Okay, so your total OPEB liability, this is a snapshot in time. This is an estimate of what you'd need to have in the bank today to cover all of the benefits that you have promised to your existing retirees and your existing active employees who have qualified for retirement benefits as of June 30th, 2024. That's the amount you'd have to have. So as you can see, it's gone up a little bit from last year. We went from 7.9 to 8.2. And I can go over those changes in detail. Yeah, we'll go over a few of them on the, excuse me, on the next page. Fiduciary net position is a fancy way to say your assets, if you're not familiar with that term. And as you can see, your assets are greater than your liability. We show it as a negative because it offsets the liability. So you're currently overfunded. That's what the net OPEB liability is. It's the difference between the two, or in this case, since we show it as a negative, the sum of the two amounts.
So we're overfunded by $500,000?
That's correct.
$510,000?
Does that mean we get to end this meeting?
It should make it go.
No, we get
Go
to go to
faster.
Bahamas.
We did it.
Yay. I'm
So-
having a hard time finding your charts
sorry.
in my
Oh,
lots and lots of pages here.
Oh, 100.
but this is the report
Uh-huh.
behind the report.
That's right.
How about here?
Yes, the money is in a Section 115 trust, and so it can only be used for retiree healthcare benefits.
I read the staff reports.
The overage?
Where it is. And I know that.
Um,
Okay, we put it together.
It just keeps increasing. You
You're good.
probably don't want to put any more money into the fund, and you should just be using it to pay benefits.
Correct. We're not putting anything in the fund. We're using it to fund our retiree health. And the 100% of the healthcare portion, just not the PEMCA that we pay to CalPERS, which is the 157. That PEMCA is the minimum, was it, what's the?
Go with the acronym.
Yeah.
To allow retirees to participate in the healthcare plan from CalPERS after they retire on their own dime.
Okay.
Yes. Correct, correct. So what we would do is we pay, because we pay CalPERS directly, and that's monthly, the minimum amount, because we adopted that back in 2015.
But that's for pension, right? Not for the.
No, this is retiring.
Oh, it is. Oh, okay. So, sorry, my
Correct.
mistake.
And then at the end of the year, we can take that and seek reimbursement from PARS and say, we paid all these to CalPERS, and then we could get that money back to our operations expense. So currently the PEMCA amount is about 75,000 a year. But everything else, which is about 424,000, you'll see in the report, 424,000 is what we paid in 24 in medical healthcare expenses, and that came out of the trust.
I may be the only one confused by this, but I'll ask it. The chart up there, the two columns to the left, they have the same date as the top. Can you give a very simple explanation as to why then the bottom result's different? Is it just because one at the bottom says 21, 22, and the other one says 22, 23? I'm just not understanding how with the same, seem to be measuring the same thing, why you've got a different endpoint.
Can I answer that real
Yeah,
quick?
go ahead.
It's because of fiscal year. So fiscal year 21-22 ended 6/30/2022. That's why it shows at the bottom. Fiscal year 22-23 ended 6/30/2023. So that's what those bottom columns are.
But my question is, there's, in the middle column for fiscal '23, the first line below the heading at the top says 6/30/22. Is that because it's a roll forward and not a complete valuation?
That's correct, yeah.
Ah,
Every 2
okay.
years, we
Figured it
update the
out.
census. So the valuation, the new census is only done every 2 years. So that'll show the same date twice, although it looks like I have an extra 2 in there. And then skip forward 2 years.
Got it.
Whereas the measurement date and report date will always increase by 1 year. So you can see that the valuation date is 22, 22, 24, and all the other ones are 22, 23, 24.
Does that help, Wally?
Maybe I'll see Robert later.
I think it's, this, these bottom two things are during the year. Same year as the top column.
Correct.
This is the, as of the year end date. So this is that fiscal year. This is the that just as of a certain date, rather than being the amount that was contributed the whole year, whatever.
I guess I would still have a question, and that is for, let's take fiscal '24, on the bottom chart, it says actuarially determined contribution, which I guess means that's how much we're supposed to pay in, and it says 119,709, but you look two columns up, or 2 rows up, and it says, but we don't have any liability. We're $510,000 above the liability. Why would we have to have an actuarially determined contribution when we're overfunded? I don't get that.
Yeah, and it gets pretty complicated. So we can,
I guess.
I did want to talk about that
Okay, good,
during the,
good. Thank you.
today, yeah. So, because there's other factors involved. But yes, you are overfunded and you don't have to put any money in the trust at this time. You don't. And that was in the past. So that year's already gone. So if you haven't put any money in, then great. And I'll show you.
Did put that.
We haven't. The 119,709 is what would be our actuarial determined contribution for fiscal year 23-24. That's paying the present value of those that are currently earning that. We would pay that plus the retired liability.
That's if we didn't have that.
Correct. Correct.
Could I just confirm my understanding of something? That the fiduciary net position, which is our assets, are those in a separate account that is only Atherton, not pooled with anyone else?
Correct. It's Atherton's with PARS trust. That's our trust with PARS, who administers our retiree health for
Okay,
us.
and so therefore also
Yes.
the liability is not pooled in any way with any other plans.
The liabilities are a liability.
So unlike CalPERS, we don't suffer from other people's bad fortune.
Right.
Correct.
And then relative to, comparable accounts, are we pool with the right amount, or like 500,000 seems like a lot, but where is it relative to the account?
I haven't specifically researched it for this year, but in previous years, we're probably one of the top cities that is in the Bay Area that has funded their OPEB. There's other agencies that are in the opposite that haven't contributed. It helps us because overfunded, because we're not going to put any more money into it. Since we do this liability review every 2 years, a lot of things can change. The healthcare rates can change, mortality rates can increase, so that it can compress. Right now, it's 510,000. Maybe 10 years from now, it could be 250,000. Correct. Correct. And the health rates can change as well. They can increase it dramatically. But I think for us as an agency, we're probably one of the ones that is already using the trust to pay for medical benefits.
Mayor Lewis has a question, I
It
think.
just, I think it's related, but, not dollar signs, but, are we seeing a decrease in how many employees are getting, retirement benefits from our town? Because years ago, we made these very significant decisions to, push back and take away some of the retirement benefits. And so are these numbers going to reflect that?
Yes. So, you're right, a number of years ago, the town used to provide all its police department, public works department, administration department, everybody retiree healthcare, 90% paid, 80% paid, 100% paid.
Forever.
depending on your years of service when you retire. The caveat to that is you had to retire concurrently from CalPERS and the town of Atherton at the same time in order to get that. And then in 2012,
Yeah.
so about.
14.
when I came on board,
Correct.
Yes.
we got rid of that benefit. So,
Good
so our future
idea.
employees don't get that
After they
All that you get
Right
is
after.
the required benefit minimum to allow them to participate in the CalPERS
Yeah.
healthcare program in your retirement, but they have to pay.
Yeah. So they get to invest in themselves going forward.
And so as the town's employee census has evolved over the years, changed, we've got new employees that came on board, they don't get retiree healthcare. We have, employees that have retired from the town and CalPERS, they do get the healthcare. And we have employees that worked here for 15 years or longer, left, went to another agency and then retired, they don't get the healthcare. But all the money that was paid into the trust stays in the trust. So as our demographics change, the trust gets richer. And there's less employees in it
Mhm.
at the time, so it will change.
Cost with.
Mm.
No, no.
Totally separate.
No.
Totally separate
yeah,
agency, yeah.
No, yeah.
Because this is just town employees and town historic employees.
So let me make sure I understand that. So at some point, and I don't know how many decades after this, once all of the people who were on the old retirement benefits, once they have all passed away, then we will have nobody getting health benefits except through that little piece of CalPERS, is that right?
That's correct.
And we'll still have to pay that little piece, but we would no longer have to pay any of the other things that we offered in the past.
Correct.
Great. Thank you.
I have a question. Do we know how many people are, like, when you're doing a census, is that like 200 people, 10 people?
It's in the long report.
Yeah, it's in there, but it's down in the teens now, if that.
The current
Yeah,
ones,
it's
correct.
not a
So
huge
like
number.
one person passes away, it makes a big
Yeah.
difference.
Mhm.
Okay, interesting.
Sorry.
All right.
Rod.
No, not a problem. That's why we're here. So, yeah, I'd say out of, close to 200 California agencies, including, water districts and things like that, we have maybe 4 or 5 that are overfunded. So it's not very common to be overfunded. And if they are overfunded, it's usually less than 10%. So, yeah, and so I think the good thing for the town is you don't have a healthcare expense, essentially. Okay, yeah, so I think we'll talk about the actuarially determined contribution a little bit more later because it's misleading to look at it like that. Okay, so changes since the prior evaluation. So we mentioned that the discount rate is doing a little bit better, so that decreased your liability. There was a slight increase in the liability due to changes in your census, like who was hired, how many years of service people who left had, and how old they were when they left, people who retired or people who died or were terminated. The overall effect was a slight increase.
So do we know what the demographic assumption, the census was updated? And so did it increase or did it decrease? I mean, what are the numbers of what it was in 2022 to what it is now?
Yeah, so that's in the long report.
Long
and
reports?
And also in the staff report, I did a snapshot of the liability from 2023, the OPEB liability was 7.8 million. And then as of 24, it's 8.15 million. And then, listed in there was how it's split up between active and retiree employees on page 3. And then,
Yeah, and page number 39 in the GASB 75 report, the long report, shows the numbers. It is a
Years.
little
Yeah.
tricky to gauge just from the numbers. So like the actives went from 39 to 41, retirees went from 41 to 40. But you also have to look at their years of service and their ages, which is on page 40. And so, yeah, we just, overall, there's a slight increase in liability. Also in the long report, we have a breakdown of the dollar amounts of each of these changes. That is on page number 7. It says at the bottom, the page number. No, I'm sorry, that's page 4. Yeah, so page number 4 in the GASB 75 report, if you're interested in what, I say a slight increase or increase, what that means dollar-wise, that's spelled out there and showed in a chart at the bottom to show the relative impact of each of these changes.
Roger, on that page 4,
Yeah,
what is the service cost and the interest cost that's added to the liability?
yeah, so service cost, you may have seen it referred to as the normal cost. The service cost is the dollar amount in benefits earned by the employees working during the year. So it's the benefits earned during the year.
Got it.
So it increases the liability. And then the interest cost, there's interest added to the liability, to the service cost, to any of these changes, and then subtracted for interest on the benefit payments and that implicit subsidy credit for the year. Okay,
Yeah,
so.
I'm not sure I understand
Yeah,
still,
I did.
because the OPEB liability is just a net present value.
Right.
So why is interest being added to a net present value?
Because you need to take it from last year's value to this year's value. And so you need to add interest to it to bring it forward a year.
Okay,
Yeah, so page 4 is showing the changes from last year to this year.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, actual claim costs, premiums were updated. Claims and premiums were a little bit higher than we expected. Healthcare trend rates were updated. Trends were lower than expected. So claim costs, premiums, that's an increase. Trends, slight decrease. We updated the way we did the timing of the decrements to make it mid-year instead of the end of the year because they happen throughout the year. So we did mid-year and that averages that. That produced a slight decrease in the liability. Yeah, so for example, for the change in the discount rate from 6 to 6.3%, that was a $240,000 decrease in your liability. Okay. I don't think I talked much about the implicit subsidy. Do you want me to go over what that is?
Sure.
you can
I don't
refresh.
think we really have it in the presentation. The ghost numbers, yeah, or the Keep Actuaries Employed Act, as some people have called it. So the premiums that you charge retirees before they hit Medicare age are the same premiums that are charged to active employees. And as you might guess, older individuals on average have higher healthcare costs than younger individuals, especially if they're working. So people who cost more, people who cost less, both charge the same premium. You can kind of see how there's a little bit of an imbalance there. GASB 75 measures the retiree liability only. So it needs to have a value for that imbalance. The The active employees are paying a little bit higher of a premium than they would if they were rated on their own, and the retirees are paying a little bit lower. So we need to take that difference and measure it with the retirees. And so there's kind of a subsidy. The active employees are subsidizing the retirees. So it's called an implicit subsidy because it's not an actual dollar amount. It's just an estimate of what that liability would be. And there's another way to look at this, which I think is helpful, which is if you were to close the plan today and give each of the retirees, a handful of money and say, here's the money that you need to fund your retiree health costs for the rest of your life. They were to take that money and they were to go out in the market and buy a retiree healthcare plan, they would not be able to find that subsidized rate that you're giving them now. They would be rated on their own. And so they would pay a higher cost because any insurer would say, oh, you're, 62 or your average cost is higher, so we're going to charge you a little bit more. So you need to give them a larger dollar amount when you close the plan than you would the active employees. So we need to factor that into the retiree liability, that extra cost.
So,
Go ahead.
well, this has come up before, and I think I've never totally understood it, but the sort of the prevailing wisdom is that amount never will have to be paid. And actually, per page 25 of the thing, that the implicit subsidy accounts for like over $1.5 million of the total liability.
Right.
And if you say that never has to be paid, then our sort of real world surplus goes up to $2 million. Is that the way you would look at it?
I'm paying attention.
You could, you'll notice in the valuation though, that we keep, the way that we do it, we keep track of the implicit subsidy throughout the valuation. So you can always see where you're being,
Yeah.
charged for it in the liability and where you're being credited for it in, the assets or the actuarially determined contribution. So you're right. So it is added and it's there, but we also give you credit for it. So you're never expected to pay more than you need to. It's just a number that's there if you were to terminate the plan.
Well, what do you mean you give us credit for it?
Like in the actuarially determined contribution, there's a credit for it.
Oh,
So it reduces what you're required to pay.
but okay. But still, we have a $2 million surplus if you don't count that.
That's right.
And based on what you're saying, that's a more realistic way of looking at it because we won't have to pay that ever. Will we? Or
As
am
long
I
as you don't
wrong?
terminate the plan. Yes, you would not have to pay it.
Okay. I know you have, and I know you have to account for it that way because of GASB 75, I think.
Right.
But I've never understood the justification. You gave a justification of if we had to pay people to go out and get their own healthcare plans, but
We don't.
Have
we
we ever
don't.
done that before?
Yeah.
We've ever done, have we done that?
have to do that
If we
if we
cancel,
decide we don't want to provide the employees the opportunity to participate in the offers, the healthcare plan.
Okay.
If the healthcare plan is something we can exit from.
okay.
Mike is off.
Pension has the pension has thanks, exit cost.
Big cost.
Yeah, but the healthcare plan, we could choose to do something different as an agency.
Mhm.
And then we'd be exiting the plan and then we would have to do
Okay.
what you're
To
talking about.
at least offer that, or would we be required to pay it?
Required, I
Required.
assume.
And then they would no longer, and so our new plan would only apply to existing or new employees.
Right.
So a question about, which is kind of related to the subsidy, when you were mentioning that normally if you had a younger employed person and an older retired person, they probably, and they just went out to get health insurance, the older person would probably have to pay more. But does that take into account the fact that a lot of the over 65 stuff is paid for by Medicare? Because since I retired, that's been I'm paying a lot less than my firm paid when I was still employed.
It does. The implicit subsidy only works up until Medicare age.
Okay, thank you. that makes sense.
Oh, well, yeah.
Yeah, it really
Okay,
only,
got it, got
That's-
it.
it only applies to what we call,
65?
65, you can get
65,
Medicare, yeah.
yeah, it only applies to people whom we call early retirees or pre-Medicare retirees. Yeah, which is typically,
The long report, and somehow it just went right by me.
yeah, so at age 50 to 65, I think is the earliest they can retire. Okay, so yeah, so we're talking about implicit subsidy there, just to give you a sense of what that is. And so you see anytime we subtract benefit payments from the liability, you know, the liability change each year, you add service cost and interest and then changes in various factors. And then you subtract out the benefits that you paid and the implicit subsidy credit.
And that can be seen on page 4 of the report. The benefits paid was 424. This subsidy credit was 98,000. It gives us our measurement viability of 8 million.
Yeah, and as Mr. Hill mentioned, there's about 1.5 million of the total liability is due to the implicit subsidy.
Correct.
So in terms of deciding whether we should contribute more money at any point in time, I think it makes sense to add that to the actuarially determined surplus.
Right, it is factored in there,
Yeah.
and we'll go over that in a little detail. I do mention ADC a little bit later in the presentation. We could talk about it now, or I could go through the next couple of pages until we get to it.
Whatever you think makes no sense. You're
Okay.
you're the pro.
All right, well, let's just keep going. Gainless reconciliation. So this is more just a reconciliation, it's just showing you how the numbers changed. It was 7.9, just under 7.9. We expected it to be just a little bit over 7.9, just using straightforward math to vote forward. But then we updated the census and updated claims and premiums and trends and the discount rate and decrement timing and might have changed. No, I don't think we changed tables this time. So with all those changes in mind, there was a loss of $218,000 and your liability turned out to be 8.2 million instead of 7.9. So minor difference, but those changes get factored in and they get amortized over a period of time. All right, adding in the assets, similar process. We took your assets, we said what you expected to come out with, and then we said, okay, here's what you actually came out with, and the difference will be amortized through your expense. Okay, chart for those who like charts and to see things visually. This one's a little tricky. It's because we're trying to show you your assets versus your total liability and your net liability. But when it goes to a negative OPEB asset or a negative net OPEB liability, or as a negative liability would be called an asset. Not quite sure how to show that. So I've done the best could here. The blue is your assets, and then the red is the net liability. So in the first 4 columns, the sum of the two is your total liability. So you can see how you started out and you're a little bit underfunded, 4 million, and then 3.6 and 3.1, then only a tenth of a million. And then in 2022, you started being overfunded. So your assets were higher than the liability. So there, the purple is your total OPEB liability. I wasn't quite sure how to best show this. It's tricky. And at this year, you're $500,000 over.
How did that flip? Is it just because,
You can see your assets are growing each year. That was part of it. It was also changes in demographics, changes in plan costs, the plan provisions. You're seeing maybe a little bit of the effect of those plan provisions working their way through those changes in plan provisions back in 12 and 13. Okay, now we're at the actuarially determined contribution. Okay, so according to GASB 75, the actuarially determined contribution is, and these are just the big pieces, there's some smaller pieces, the service cost. So you need to contribute the benefits that you've earned during the year. You need to amortize your unfunded liability, your net OPEB liability. And then the sum of those two is your total employer contribution. Things I don't show here are the administrative expense. You need to put in a little bit of money to cover your admin expense, and then the interest on these items. And then if you had any employee contributions, those would be subtracted, but you don't. So those are the two major components that make up the contribution. So this is what you would need to put into the trust fund each year to keep it, to reduce your net liability to zero and to fund your trust fund.
But it's, okay, that's what I don't get.
Yeah,
It's
so,
overfunded, so
Yeah.
it just doesn't make sense.
yeah,
to
so
me.
I'm going to switch over to the GASB 75 report. Just wanted to show you quickly what your history was. So the blue is what you should put into the fund according to the formula, and then the green is what you actually put in. And so you see that for past several years, from 19 through 23, you put in more than you needed to. And so that grew your fund so that you're in the position you are today. All right, so we're going to switch to the long report so we can talk more about the ADC.
And that
A
was
quick question.
done
George,
purposefully.
George, the shows 2024, the green is what we actually put in.
Mhm.
Is that what you were saying we had to put in?
That's is that the PEMCA cost, Robert? Is that the 75,000 or
119.
No, that is the,
2024, the 119,000?
yeah, that is our,
Because I thought we had recommended it been accepted. We were going to stop.
that's the
PEMCA,
PEMCA portion
yeah. So
Okay.
for the actual premiums and all those costs, those are coming right
out of the
fund.
trust, correct?
Okay.
And the larger contributions we made in years past, some of that was deliberate on behalf of the town to raise the fund up to a certain amount
Correct.
and then stop putting funds in and start drawing funds out.
Yeah.
And then we had
I'm
good
not a
years on
finance guy.
interest.
Page 12, the right-hand tables. What's the acronym FYE and the acronym ADC stand for?
ADC is actuarially determined contribution. Actuarially determined contribution,
Actuarial.
yeah,
What's the FYE?
fiscal year end.
Fiscal year end. End of
Fiscal year end, is that
So,
it?
Yeah.
so, Wally,
Yes.
this chart that he just, went over, that's the actuarially determined contribution, and that's how it's calculated. And so that's that ADC that is in the, because it followed from page 11 to page 12. And
You said actuarial determined,
actuarially determined contribution.
okay.
Flows off your tongue.
It just,
So-
right
Yeah.
there. And the definition on this page, if you.
The
have it
previous
in-
page, yeah, was actuarially determined contribution.
It talks about how it's
Okay,
together.
Yeah.
so at some point, 2019, it looks like, it was decided to start overfunding it so that we could stop funding it at some point.
I
And
think
it
we.
just-
I
No,
think
not
we-
start overfunding
I
it.
think we did that earlier than this slide shows. In those years, we were paying the premiums out of the fund or directly from our general fund into the fund
Correct.
The fund's gaining interest, so we're doing something.
as well,
yeah.
yes. And
And-
then
and-
in 2023, we started to draw down the premiums from the fund.
Completely correct.
And that is good.
That's
It's good.
Yes.
So
It takes it out of our operational budget.
Right, okay.
So we freed up about 500,000 in expenditures to the operations for health benefits that we're not paying out of the general fund. So it's completely coming out of the trust. And then the other component that I think we've touched on, but probably haven't highlighted, is the investments return on the fund have been doing well. Obviously, 2022 was a tough one, but up to that point, we were meeting, our interest was growing because we had about 5.6 million already in the trust that we contributed based on council, recommendation, as George mentioned, to set a certain amount in there. And then from that point on, the trust was growing through interest. And that's where we have the 8 point.
And I assume that when we do draw money from the OPEB trust and use it in a legitimate way, that there's no other effect, there's no tax effect, there's no anything detrimental. It just moves the money from one place to another.
Correct.
Got
And that's why we use the trust.
Yeah.
Because it's not taxed to the retiree. It's a
Oh.
115 trust.
Oh, I forgot about that.
That's why we're doing it that way. Otherwise, it would have been taxed.
Uh-huh.
So.
Good.
All right.
I apologize for not understanding. your acronyms. Later on, you refer to your company Gov Invest. Looks like it's owned by BNY. Is that Bank of New York? Who is that?
I don't think they are.
No, I think it's probably the next presentation.
Further in.
Yeah, that's the next
BNY.
presentation. That's our investment presentation. That's Insight Investment.
Next
They
item on
are,
the agenda.
that's the next item.
Who's BNY?
Bank of New York,
Bank of- it is
Mellon,
Bank of
correct,
New York.
correct, correct.
Oh. Yeah, I believe we should.
I think it's Mr. Polito.
Oh, my God.
Can you bring them up on the screen or no?
He's what?
Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I think we misspoke. I don't think we made the ADC despite what it shows there in 2023 or 2024.
Correct, we haven't, but that's including it's taken into effect what we've paid to CalPERS, the PEMCA amount.
But that's only $157 a month per person.
Correct. But then, but for a year, that's about 80,000. And then there's that implicit subsidy credit that gets factored in. The implicit subsidy that gets factored in, and then it gets credited out on the liability.
I understand how the implicit subsidy will gradually go away, and so a certain amount will be credited on a regular basis. But I don't believe I believe what this chart shows is what the actuaries determined should have been the ADC. But I don't think those green bars are correct, at least not for 23 and 24. There's no way we put $600,000 or whatever into that fund in 23.
I mean, maybe the chart's reversed, but in 23, it shows 142. That would have been the ADC.
The colors are wrong.
Yeah.
The ADC is a calculated number, which they're showing. That's what the actuary said. But we didn't make the contribution because we didn't need to. But those green bars make no sense to me.
I can. In 22, 23, the fiscal year ending June 30th, 23, so that'd be the next to the last green bar there. The city contributed $518,712. And then to that, there's an implicit subsidy of 108,000. So the total of those two is 627,000, 26,000.
Why is there such a big difference?
But they don't match the numbers,
Don't match to what?
or what you just said.
So this is my first meeting, but it seems like the blue bar and the green bar, our goal is to try and keep them close to each other, right? Not have them be the ADC and the actual of what we contribute. Shouldn't they be
Ideally, you should contribute at least the blue bar.
Okay, so I guess my question is the green bar what we actually put in? And
Yes.
why is there such a big difference between the green bar and the blue bar in 2023?
Because you contributed more than you needed to.
Yeah, I get that. I'm asking why did we contribute more money than
Why
we
did we
needed
do that?
to,
Yeah.
is my question.
I think what was occurring was we were paying the ADC and we
And-
were paying the premium benefits
Yes,
into the fund.
Okay,
yes.
and now we don't have to do that
We
anymore.
No,
don't
we
do
don't have to
that.
do
We
that.
don't, not only do we not contribute the ADC, but I think, or we do contribute the PEMCA stuff.
Correct.
But we're no longer contributing the premium costs.
So going forward, the 2024 blue-green bar being low and close to each other is what we're assuming will happen
Mhm.
moving forward?
Yes, I'm gonna explain
Yes.
2 more pages and then 23, 24 should hopefully make sense to you.
Okay,
Big
that's,
decline.
The fact that
That's
even
what I-
though you don't need to contribute anything, there's still a bar there. I'll explain that.
Correct. Correct. The ADC is just saying this is what you have to pay to maintain, to keep up with your liability. It doesn't mean that we're paying.
But you don't have to pay.
Correct.
What you should pay if you want to keep up with the estimated future liability,
Right.
but not what you have to pay.
Sort of. I'll explain it in a minute.
Yeah,
All
sort
right.
of, yeah.
So hopefully it all makes sense in a minute. Okay, I'm going to start with a little precursor to the ADC, which is the unfunded liability or the net OPEB liability on page 16 of the GASB 75 report in your packet. So that's the one that says Town of Atherton at the top, GASB 75 OPEB valuation, and then find page number 16, which is the amortization of the net OPEB liability.
Yep.
Okay, so these are future ADCs. So this is for 24, 25, 26, and 27. You can see that we're taking beginning of year balances of your OPEB liability and your assets and coming up with a difference, and that's negative because you're overfunded. So we're amortizing that over a closed 20-year period. You've got 13 years to go, and then 12 and 11 over those 3 years. And so the amortization is a negative $41,000. The very bottom.
This is just sort of how it's shown in our financial statements, right? Which the 41,000, or tell me if I'm wrong, the 41,000 isn't some amount that we're going to get in cash or,
No, it's okay. So the ADC is if you had no unfunded liability, if you were 100% funded,
yeah, okay.
the contribution you should make each year should be the benefits earned plus admin expense and interest. But if you have an unfunded liability that you're trying to get rid of, like you were, 80% funded, then you need to take that 20% unfunded and you're going to spread that out over, say, 20 years and put that into the ADC each year. In your case, you're overfunded. So we're reversing the process. We're saying you can lower your ADC by
Yeah.
that overfunded amount.
It's going to reduce the ADC?
It is, right. Okay, so I just that's a little background as to why that's negative.
Yeah.
So if you go to page 17, this is where we break down the ADC into all the different components. And you get to see what's actually going on here, hopefully. Okay, so we'll just look at the first column. Service cost. So this is the dollar amount of the benefits earned during the year. $115,000, 114,998. Then we subtract out that amortization because you're overfunded. So you get some credit for that.
Mhm.
Your admin expense is almost the same amount, 41,000. So that kind of cancels each other out. The interest on all those amounts, $4,433. So your ADC for 24, 25 is $120,000 and $120,036. Okay.
Now, is that estimated or is that, because I couldn't tell if the estimated was only supposed to be over the fiscal 27, or if it was supposed to be over all three lines?
It's only over the 26, 27 because we're doing,
You're already determined then that the fiscal 25 and fiscal 26 have already been determined.
yeah, and that's really
Okay.
important because I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The 24, 25 amount was determined in a prior report. We haven't changed it.
Ah, okay.
Okay, because we don't want to change it in case you're already budgeted for it. I'm going to suggest that if you haven't made a contribution to the trust fund, that you don't, which it sounds like you're not going to. Because, well, but I need to explain the bottom part first before I explain the next step. Okay, so of that $123,000, you're getting a credit for $107,633 for the implicit subsidy. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to pay anything. That's just the credit you get for the implicit subsidy. So we talked earlier about how, you're overfunded by a little bit more than you think you are because of that implicit subsidy part of the liability. Well, this is where I'm saying you're not paying for that. You don't have to actually pay anything for that because we're taking it out of what you have to pay. So the difference between those two amounts is what you should contribute to the trust fund. That's $12,000. But again, this was calculated in a prior report when you weren't quite as overfunded as you were. Today, I ran the numbers in case this came up. If we were to redo those numbers using today's numbers, the contribution to the trust fund would be negative $45,000, which is in line with the next 2 years. You see it's, negative 50,000 and negative 57, meaning you could actually take money out, but you can't because it's a Section 115 trust. So it's just, you just don't do anything. So, again, if you haven't put money in, I would recommend that you don't. So,
Good.
Haven't.
and the key difference is that the implicit subsidy number of $107,000 there, calculated in a prior report, calculating it with, the new valuation, it's 167 or something like that. So that number went way up. So that's why the number went from positive 12 to negative 45. Okay. So the other important thing that I wanted to mention was that this credit for implicit subsidy line of, about $100,000, that's that green bar that you're seeing on that other chart. So even though you didn't contribute anything, that's why it's showing that green bar, because it's just a credit that you're getting. It's not money that you've actually paid. In 23, 24, your ADC was $119,000 and your implicit subsidy was $98,000. So that's why you saw a slightly higher blue bar and a slightly lower green bar for that year. Okay, so that was a lot. It also explained a lot of the questions, hopefully, that you've had, but please ask away if anything's not clear, because again, that was a lot all at once, so.
So the ADC components there, the town's contribution, that's actual dollars, right?
Town's contribution to the trust fund is,
12,403.
yeah, that's what
Okay.
what we were recommending that you put into the trust fund.
Oh.
As of today, I would say don't. And we could update the report to show that too,
Okay.
if you wish. It's an easy update.
Yeah.
Just ran the numbers again
It's
today.
the actual dollars
Yeah.
recommended. I
Most
guess.
agencies don't want us,
Implicit
Yeah.
subsidy went up from 107 to 167,000, which created that credit for the town's contribution, right?
that's right. Yeah, and most agencies don't want us to update that number because they've already done their budget based on that. But we're happy to update it. And that's also why that last column says estimated, because when we run this report next year,
Yeah.
we can update that number also if you want, that last column, because it'll be, still be a future period when we produce next year's report.
So
Robert, which do you prefer? To update it? I
we-
mean, is it booked in our?
No, because we haven't
Budget?
paid it, we didn't budget it. And I know why they do that because, correct, and we used last year's roll forward report. If we hadn't paid anything, that's what we would budget for
Mhm.
the 24, 25. So if they update it, it'll just update it to the current valuation.
I'd like to
And
see it up-
it
don't-
shouldn't be.
don't bother with
I
it?
wouldn't
I'll let-
bother with
yeah, 'cause then
updating it. Yeah,
it's
we
gonna
haven't
get
paid
up-
it. It's not
Correct.
budgeted, so,
Well,
Yeah.
we know it's
Good.
there then.
right.
Yeah, that last chart we looked at with the blue and green lines, a text version of that does go into your ACFR.
Mhm.
So that would be the only reason to update it is so that it looks a little bit better there. There's no financial penalty for not hitting the ADC at all. It just means you have less money in your assets than you could have if you paid the full amount. In your case, you're overfunded, so it doesn't matter at all, but
Yeah.
I felt the air conditioning.
And then when because this is the first year of the actuarial report, next year we'll do the roll forward. So obviously that estimate 26, 27 will get adjusted, trued up.
So I have a question which I think is for George, and that is in reading through the long report, and I think I knew this, but I just hadn't entirely focused on it. So what we have is a defined benefit plan as opposed to a defined contribution plan. I mean, when I was working, it became real obvious to all the for-profits that you really can't do the defined benefits, too expensive.
So what you're actually talking about is a pension plan. This isn't a,
Well, this says the
Well-
town administers a single employee defined benefit post-employment health care
post-employment
plan.
healthcare plan, yeah,
Post-employment,
right.
that's pension.
Healthcare plan,
Okay, well, I
Yeah.
thought we're talking about healthcare both.
yes. I'm sorry, when I think of a defined benefit versus defined contribution, I think 401k versus the CalPERS pension plan,
No,
but
but
this
this
is
is
a
a defined
defined
benefit,
benefit
and that's why it's so
healthcare plan.
freaking expensive. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
Why can't, are we not allowed to change to defined contribution?
no, you can.
Have we ever considered it at the council level?
The council, yeah, the council talked about going to a cafeteria style
Hmm.
benefit option where, the town paid a
And I
portion, et
think
cetera.
almost all the for-profit world has certainly gone there.
Yeah,
It's just too expensive to do that.
it would, so the CalPERS healthcare plan is part of the CalPERS system. And it is a recruitment benefit as well.
Ah.
That is helpful.
Yeah, I think the only caveat is that you'd still have to meet PEMCA. So whatever you define the contribution amount to be, it would have to be at least the PEMCA amount.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then given that the money in this trust is an irrevocable trust, we're in a surplus now. We can't ever get the money back. So,
well, we can pay it out for proper expenses, but that'll have to be in the future. We can't pull it out. We can't pull it out now just because it's a surplus.
well, if all the obligations ended and we were in a
But-
surplus, we wouldn't
But they
get it
won't
back,
because we have
would we?
ongoing obligations to all the
Yeah.
people
Yeah. but
who are in the
right.
plan, even if we somehow stop the plan tomorrow, which I don't think we can, but all the people who are already in it, we'd still continue to have to pay for that.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, if we went to a defined contribution plan,
Mhm.
it, that would reduce the liability, but
Sure,
we're
but-
already overfunded, so it wouldn't actually do us any good.
Right, because the liability would still be the PEMCA minimum, which is what our current liability is now.
Sometimes you can't
It,
win.
it would just make the surplus larger. Yeah.
And currently, right now, the minimum is 157, 157 a month is what that would be. But, 20 years from now, that could be
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going up
250.
about 3 or 4% a year, but CalPERS could at some point step it up. Possibly, I don't know how they decide that, but yeah, just for comparison, you're paying about $400,000 to $500,000 in benefits right now, and your trust fund earned $800,000 plus. So you're actually gaining
2 years, basically. worth.
earnings higher than benefits are being paid out.
Wow.
And that's assuming that continues,
If
the
only my pension plan
that
was
investment
gonna show you.
continues, the interest.
Yeah.
So is this just like a self-sustaining thing now that
Mhm.
we're just like,
Mhm.
keep going?
Yeah,
We're
just,
adding nothing. It's all
Right.
kind of doing it.
right. And we're doing earlier than what we anticipated. Back when we looked at this 11 years ago, it looked like that was like 25 years from now, we would start using trust. And now we're using it. But that's why we do these reports every 2 years and refresh them because, again, the health rates could change, trends could change, the investments could change, the mortality could change. And so we're in a good place. And even if there's some adjustments, we have that, there's room for compression.
Currently, there's about, correct me if I'm wrong on these figures, Robert, about 61 retiree type employees, including employees and spouses, surviving spouses, that are the longer term retiree payments that we have, some of which may be just PEMCA, some of which may be actual healthcare costs. Those will eventually roll off. And then we've got 41 or so active employees that are currently employed by the town. And of that, maybe 4 or so, one of them just actually retired, but maybe 4 or so are eligible for retiree full health care benefits. Most of those are in the PD. And once they roll into retirement, we have to pay for those into retirement, but everybody else on staff is just PEMCA minimums.
That's the
good.
the census changes.
Really good.
Same thing with the CalPERS, right? They're the classic plans. Now it's becoming, there's more of the new PEPRA plans. So, and that's what's happening here on this.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I really appreciate having the pro here to explain these complicated issues.
Appreciate it.
So, Robert, shall we move to our next agenda item? Presentation by Insight Asset Management. Do we have a guest here for that, or is that?
Yes, it's on here. Let's see.
Dave?
Dave Whitcomb, yeah. You see Dave on there?
They've had trouble since we had trouble.
Um,
We-
No.
let's see.
We have their slides. Can you do their slides, Robert?
I'll do it.
Let's see.
Get a little loopy in these meetings. It's so many words. So I'm like, what does that word mean? What does that word mean?
I just pinged him. Real quick on that item, if we just want to recommend to just accept the report, the GASB 75 report.
To accept the report.
Oh, okay. Well, I can't move because I ran out of time and didn't get to it.
We're talking about the previous.
Oh, move to
Which
invest
one?
this one.
Yes,
Oh,
yes,
this one
yes,
I can
yes.
do.
The
The
OPEB.
Whitcomb I can't.
Yeah, the OPEB one, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, my apologies, my apologies. So we're not ready to end that item yet. I would like to call for a motion, and we do still have a quorum, even though Committee Member Patil had to leave. We still have 3 out of 5, so we can still take action. But the report we've just received from, from Roger, could I have a motion to approve that or recommend approval to the council?
I move we recommend
Can I have a
approval to the
second?
council.
Wally, please.
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstain? It's unanimous. Thank you.
Next
And thank you
item.
for reminding me about that point of order. So now we can move on or not move on to the Insight Asset Management Investment Program Review, except they don't seem to be here.
Yeah, he's
Did he communicate
dialing
with
in.
you? Did he have some
Yes, he's
emergency?
dialing in. He's the one that, I'm sorry, he had jury duty, or otherwise he would have been here, but he's
Is it-
getting,
Is it
dialed
time
in.
sensitive? Do we do it next meeting
we could,
or?
I'm
And
just want to see.
If you can dial in, it seems like it'd be nice to get it done, because
Yeah.
we would like to be able to talk about the investment policy, right? See if we need any
Yes.
changes to it.
Earn more money. Most of it's in LAFCO,
Buy low,
right?
sell high.
Isn't that right?
Yeah, he's trying.
Most of it is in LAFCO. Relatively liquid.
I had a question just about, I looked at the policy and trying to, there are limits of this can't exceed 30% of the total, let's say. Robert, is that 30% of the current market value
For
for whatever category?
the midterm,
Well, midterm I looked at because seem to
Is
be
it-
very close to that.
yeah,
Right.
it's as the total investment.
But so it's not defined as the amount we invested or it's the market or the par value, it's the market value. Is that right?
It's the market value.
So in other words, it needs to be, how often does it have to be tested? Monthly, quarterly?
We look at it quarterly to verify, but
Balance if necessary to get back within the percentages.
correct, we do. And then as investments roll off, Dave and we communicate, and so he'll let me know, because I like to get the medium notes, and he'll let me know if we're at the max of it, and say we can't because we're at the threshold. Let's see, bear with me.
Robert, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine. Thank you, Dave. Can you hear us?
Hang on.
Yeah, we can hear you. It's just our video is not working, so you'd have to
This is.
talk
just
through it.
Terrible that we can't get.
Oh, there we are.
Yeah.
So you can hear me okay, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
Okay, great. Let's go down to slide number 4. First of all, thanks for having me here. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but as Robert might have explained, up until 2 hours ago, I was being tried to go into a jury. So they had me on jury duty. Fortunately, I didn't get selected, so I was able to join you here today. So let's talk about this. This is what we call 2 yield curves. And all a yield curve is a graphic representation of yields based on a different maturity area. So you see across the bottom, 3-month, 6-month, 1 year, all the way out to 10 years. And what we do is we just simply graph the yields for a particular point in time. And this has happened to be, we graphed them for end of December a year ago in that dashed light green line. And then this December in the solid green line. And you can see quite a dramatic change from year to year. And last year at this time, the yield curve was inverted, which means that short-term rates were paying higher than long-term rates. And that's not the typical situation. But because the Federal Reserve was raising interest rates so quickly and we're keeping rates relatively high, that had very, very short-term rates at higher levels than longer-term rates. And now the yield curve is taking a more normal shape. It's not quite there yet, but it's getting closer as of 12/31. And you can see the 3-month rates had dropped about 100 basis points. And the 2-year rates were about the same. So that was the area in which the yield curves are pivoting around. And as you went out longer, the longer term rates actually got higher and out to the 10-year area. Even now today, the rates are even higher than they were at the end of December. That 10-year, as we got on the call, was paying 4.79, so it was up almost 100 basis points on the long end. The 5-year was paying 4.60, so it was up pretty substantially too. It was up about 80 basis points. And even the 2-year had risen. It's now from 4.25. It's now at 4.37. So
Dave,
longer term rates are going up,
Dave?
short term rates are going down. And that we think is going to continue, but there are some questions as to what's going to happen. And let's talk about that because this is a big change in environment. As we know, with the election, a lot of things are changing. Let's drop down to the next slide.
Dave,
We have a
Dave,
question
can
real
you,
quick.
I have a question. This is Ann Walker,
Yes.
Chair of this committee. So exactly what types of investments are included in this yield curve?
These are all, this is a treasury yield curve. All
Excuse
just
me, a what?
treasuries.
Treasuries, thank you. I
All
couldn't,
treasury.
I missed that. I couldn't see where that
Yes.
was labeled. Okay.
Good question.
Yeah, this is a pure treasury yield curve. So,
Okay.
and you're right, we could
That
have
makes sense.
yield curves for corporates or all kinds of different things.
Your money in T-bills.
But this is the treasury. Let's drop down to the next slide, Robert.
I'm gonna need it for, I'm not lasting 10 years.
So
Tell
this
us what
is
the beige
is,
book
uh,
is.
Yeah.
The beige.
this is a slide from our chief economist. And this comes from the Beige Book. And the Beige Book is kind of an anecdotal book where they go around different regions of the country and ask them sort of how, and they get a sense of how their economy is going in their region. And they can either say things like that it's really good, it's robust, it's moderately robust, it's modest, which is sort of a middle area, or unchanged. And then it can go into sharp contraction and a moderate decline. I think our chief economist is trying to show that over the last couple of years, the economy has been declining, but I don't think this is a really great slide. Quite frankly, we do keep it in here because, it's our economic slide pack. I would juxtapose this with the actual measures for GDP. And as you know, GDP, gross domestic product, is the broadest measure of economic activity. And in 2022, just to give you an idea, GDP averaged 1.9% for the year. And before the pandemic, the 10-year sort of long-term average was 1.9%. So that's kind of our baseline, is somewhere around 2% is sort of the baseline growth expectation for gross domestic product. Well, in 2023, we averaged 2.5%. So the economy was running a little bit better than the long-term average. And so far, we don't have the fourth quarter reading in yet, but for the first 3 quarters, the first quarter was running at 1.3%. The second quarter was running at 3%. And the third quarter so far in 2024 was running at 3.1%. Well, if you average those 3 quarters together, you're at 2.47%. So that's looking very similar to 2023, which again is above that long-term average. So when the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Chairman Powell, comes out and says, hey, economic activity in the economy is pretty strong and the economy looks pretty good. Well, it does. When you compare it to the long-term average, it looks reasonably robust, not killing it, not quite as fast as it was during the last Trump administration, but pretty good over the long-term average. There's a measure run by the Atlanta Fed, which kind of gives us, it's called GDP Now. It's a model that kind of gives us an idea of where the current quarter is going to come in, and that's been running at 2.7%. So we're thinking that fourth quarter of 24 is going to be up somewhere between 2.5% to 3%. And that will give us growth that's running above where it was even last year in 2023. So I think we're going to look at 2024 and it's going to have, again, above average growth. So this beige book really doesn't tell the whole story. The economy is looking pretty robust right now. And that's why the Federal Reserve Chairman comes out and the last couple of meetings, he's said, hey, the economy looks pretty good. It looks very, not super strong, but good. And it looks like a solid, strong economy. Let's go down to the next thing. Because let's go down to the next slide, Robert. The Fed has two mandates. One is full employment. And you say, well, what is full employment? Well, when I went to school many decades ago, frictional unemployment, or the standard level of unemployment, was said to be around 5%, somewhere in that general area. That's because people are always changing jobs, people are getting laid off, they're in between jobs shortly for a short period of time or they're moving to different areas of the country, they may be out of work for a small period of time. So frictional unemployment's generally been considered to be somewhere around 5%. Well, that's why I'm saying this labor demand is basically back in balance. For a long time in 2020 and 2021, there were a lot more, well, actually in 22, there were a lot more jobs out there than there were people looking for work. And in fact, the number of job openings was almost twice what people were available for unemployment. So that's come basically back into balance now. The available jobs is somewhere very close to about the available workers. And so the Fed's been pretty happy with the current state of the employment market. And so, in fact, the jobs market added 227,000 new jobs in November. And we just got the December reading last week, and that added 256,000 new jobs. They were only expecting about 160,000, and they got almost 260,000. And the unemployment rate, which was at one time 4.3%, dropped down to 4.2% in November, and then in December dropped again to 4.1%. So when we say if frictional unemployment is somewhere around, I don't know, it's hard to estimate. They think it's around between 4.5% and 5%. That's why when you see the Fed governor come out and say, hey, I think we have a very strong labor economy, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about the fact that, we're very close to the regular frictional unemployment rate, which is just like what they consider the absolute bottom. Now, are we at 3.5% like we were back in 22 or 23? No, we're not quite there. That was a 50-year low in unemployment. So when we're at somewhere around 4%, we're still looking at pretty much full employment. So we have got a strong economy. We're looking at full employment. So that's one side of the coin. The Fed's other part of their mandate is to keep prices stable. And let's drop down one slide and look at that, talk about that for a moment.
Dave,
So
this
stable
is
prices.
Dave,
Yeah.
this is
We have a
Ann
question.
Walker again. So
Yes, Ann.
just, anecdotally, my impression has been over the past year or more that there are an awful lot of jobs that are going begging, and they're mostly in the lower sector, lower income. People need waitresses, people need all those kinds of people, because you always see all the help wanted signs. So I'm just trying to get a handle on, does it matter which kind of jobs are not being filled? In other words, if you can't get enough waitresses, that's one thing. If you can't get enough lawyers, that's a completely different thing. How does that get factored in?
Well, you're absolutely right. It certainly can be a big mismatch in that level of unemployment. And so you don't get a perfect match on it. It's really just an overview because it's a total summary. So you can get, for instance, in your area, there might be a lot of software engineers that are out of work, and some of that and they don't want to take the waitressing jobs, and they don't want to take the other thing, the lower paying jobs, because they're looking for a job that matches their skill set. And that's what we call underemployment. And sometimes people are taking jobs that are less than what their skill sets are. And that's a possibility. And that's running right around 6%, but that has been coming down as well. And so there's always going to be some mismatch between people and the skill sets. And that's really hard for them to measure. They can only measure more of that total number, Ann. And so that could be some of the mismatch that's going on out there.
Great, thank you.
Sure, sure. Well, let's talk about one of the areas of the economy that's doing okay. It was doing better earlier in the year, and that's inflation. And inflation's been coming down since, some of the highs in late 21 and in 22. But right now, it's stalled out a little bit in the last 3 months. October, November, December, we hadn't been seeing improvements in inflation. And that stalling out does have the Federal Reserve a little bit concerned, because they're not sure, is this just a leveling out and then it's going to drop a little bit more? We've certainly come down from, that sort of close to 8% level that we were at a couple of years ago, but we're not quite down to where the Fed wants it to be. What's their goal? Their goal is to match that inflation rate to essentially the GDP growth rate. And if the long-term GDP growth rate's right around 2%, then they want to see inflation running right around 2%. Well, where is it right now? Well, CPI is one of the measures of inflation. And right now, core CPI, and core is without food and energy because those are the two most volatile categories, is running at around 3.3%. So higher than the Fed wants it to be, but it has been sort of coming down. Now, it's like I said, you see it leveling off in October and November and really even coming back up a little bit. The Fed's preferred measure is actually not CPI, which we're going to get tomorrow, by the way, is core PCE, which is personal consumption expenditures. It has a lower weighting to housing than CPI. CPI has a higher housing weighting, but even PCE is running and has leveled off and is running around 2.8%. So we're going to get that probably in February is when PCE will come out. But CPI, we have to pay attention to it tomorrow. Today we got PPI, which is Producers Price Index, which is more of a wholesale at the manufacturing level. But that actually came out, and for the first time in a couple of months, came out lower. So that was good news. And will it carry through to CPI? We're going to have to see tomorrow, but many people think it might. And this could be the reversal of this leveling off trend and maybe start with another leg down. Everyone's concern has always been what we call the last mile, which is that it's a lot easier to go from 8% to 3% than it is to go from 3% to 2%. Because as you get closer to that 2% range, it gets harder and harder, and your progress gets incrementally slower. And the fact that it's leveled off for a couple months isn't necessarily a complete concern, but the general trend has been coming down, and now it's sort of leveled off or even maybe went up a little bit over that time period. So that has the Federal Reserve concerned. And in fact, they have a meeting in which they could lower interest rates on the 29th of this month, on January 29th. And they are very likely to be on hold. I mean, there's no expectation for them to be on hold. Inflation's one of the reasons. One of the other reasons is with the new administration coming in, and we saw under the last Trump administration, he had GDP up running over 3%, and that could end up being inflationary as well. Those two objectives are a little offsetting, right? You know, as you make the economy run hotter, you're very likely to pick up some sort of inflation with that. And if the new president's goal is to cut taxes and reduce regulation in order to stimulate economic activity, that could in fact be inflationary. And so you're very likely to see the Federal Reserve on hold. I mean, they cut interest rates 100 basis points last fall. They started with 50 basis points in September, then it went in October, cut another 25 basis points, and then in December, it cut another 25 basis points. So the overnight funds rate is down 100 basis points from September. But right now, they're probably going to keep it on hold. They want to see what the new president's policy is going to be, and they also want a couple more months of this inflationary data. If inflation starts down again, and if the new president's policies don't look too inflationary, they'll likely drop rates again next year. Right now, the market doesn't have very high expectations of that. They only have about one more Fed cut built into their expectations for 2025. That compares, by the way, to September. They had 4 rate cuts built into 2025, and we've come down, and now it's only 1 rate cut built into 2025. So we're going to have to see the markets really on hold because they want to see what's going to happen with inflation, and they want to see what the new president's policies are going to do. If you have tariffs, if the tariffs turn out to be more than just threats or a negotiating tool, which is, you know, it sounds like they might be to begin with, but if they really come to fruition, tariffs will be usually inflationary because you're raising the price of imports, and we do import quite a number of items in this country, and so that could be inflationary. Let's drop down
Not gonna buy anything.
to the next slide. This next slide, unfortunately, we don't have our eco pack. So this eco pack is a little bit dated. Right now, the overnight funds rate is at 4.25.
I don't know.
We think that the Federal Reserve, that's slightly restrictive. We think that the Federal Reserve wants to get that overnight rate down to what we call the neutral rate. The neutral rate would be the rate at which monetary policy is neither stimulative or restrictive. Right now, it's slightly restrictive. We think that neutral rate is somewhere around, no one knows exactly where it is, but we think it's probably somewhere around 3.5%. And so it's slightly lower, so that the Fed funds rate is slightly restrictive right now. They're hoping that restriction will bring down inflation, but that's very difficult to say. If you have fiscal policy that is offsetting the monetary policy, and the fiscal policy is stimulative, then they might offset each other. And so that's why the Federal Reserve is reluctant to bring down rates even further. And you can see even last year, all throughout the year, Fed policy and expectation for future rates was all over the place. And it's even different today than it is on any of these projected paths from last year. Like I said, right now the market's only projecting about one Fed cut between now and the end of the year in 2025. So with that, let's drop down another slide. Some good news. The manufacturing sector has been kind of sluggish, and this comes from ISM, the Institute of Supply Management, and It's on what we call a diffusion index. So anything above 50 means it's expanding. Anything below 50 means it's contracting. The manufacturing went from 48.2 to 49.3. So it's no longer, it's just under the 50 threshold. And so that's an improvement. We just saw that last month, about 2 weeks ago. And so, and service sector, the one thing about manufacturing, and you can put manufacturing and say manufacturing's been sluggish, yes, but keep in mind, manufacturing only makes up 11% of GDP anymore. It's GDP is not driven by the manufacturing sector in this country anymore. It was at one time, 30 years ago, but it's really not today. It's a smaller sector. Like I said, it only makes up 11% of GDP. The big part of GDP, about 70% of GDP, is the service sector. And the good news is that went in the last reading up from 53.5 to 54, over 54, 54.1. So yes, the service sector of the economy is doing well. Manufacturing is doing better than it was when this slide was made. Could it get back into the expansionary area? Yes, it could, but it's not the main driver of the economy anymore. Let's go down to the next slide. We'll look at our chief economist's projections for the economy for this year. See how he did, wins and losses. On the policy rate, he was predicting the policy rate would end at 4.6 at the end of the year. It's actually 4.25. So he's a little high on that. Consumer price index, he said it was going to end up at 2.4%, and that slowing in the last couple of months is really only at about 2.9% for the year on the overall CPI index. And he said GDP was going to be at 1.9%. He keeps saying it's going to slow from the 2.5 we saw in 2023. And it's going to end up being probably higher than 2.5. My guess is it's going to be around 2.6, 2.7. So it's actually improving and not contracting. I will tell you that our chief economist has predicted a contraction in the GDP for the last 3 years. And actually, it's been going up for 3 years. So I will say that he predicts a contraction again in 2025. I don't think that's what we're going to get. I think we're going to have, and if the Trump policies come in, I think we are going to have a relatively robust economy in 2025. However, that may not lead to lower interest rates, which has been the market expectation all this fall. And if it becomes too robust of an economy, it could be inflationary, and that could lead us to higher interest rates, in fact. So as you've seen, when we going into this meeting, the 2-year Treasury was paying 4.40 roughly. That's pretty good. We haven't seen those level of rates in 15 years. So it's been a long time since we've seen short-term rates in that 2-year area up over 4%. And the portfolio, I will say, is enjoying that. And let's drop down. I'll pause here just to ask anyone if they have any economic questions, and then we're going to drop down to page 15 when we get into the portfolio.
Questions?
Hearing no questions, I mean, unfortunately, I had to send this over to Robert a little bit earlier. We have the November report. I also have some of the data from the, thank you, Robert, from the December report. You can see, here's our asset allocation. It's basically 1/3 high-grade corporate bonds. Maximum by state statute is 30%. We're at 29.5, which is basically where we typically hold it because we want that little extra yield bump that we get from the corporate bonds. Government agencies are running at 26%, and government bonds or treasuries were running there at 43. I would say that those last two percentage asset allocations are typically reversed. Typically, we're holding more agency securities than we're holding treasury securities. The difficult part over the last year is that a lot of the government agencies, whether it's Freddie Mac or Fannie Mae or federal farm credits or the federal home loan banks, haven't been issuing a lot of what the type of bonds that we want. We want longer term, when I say longer term, 2 or 3 years in terms of maturity, and we want those to be non-callable bonds. So they unfortunately are issuing more callable bonds because they think we're at the top of the interest rate cycle, and they want to be able to call those bonds away. And they're issuing a lot of floating rate debt so that if rates do drop, the repricing on that debt goes down automatically. And they're doing a lot more of their funding with short-term securities, simply because when those mature, hopefully interest rates will be lower and they can refinance those shorter bonds at a lower rate. So we don't want necessarily to stay in shorter bonds. We want to try and lock in. If we think we're at the top of the interest rate cycle, which we have for the last year, we want to lock in those longer term rates for a longer period of time. And we don't want to have either floating rate or callable bonds. And we don't necessarily want to put a lot of shorter bonds into the portfolio. You already have some shorter exposure through your LAIF exposure. That's relatively short-term bond exposure. The weighted average duration of this portfolio, which is sort of the length and maturity, is about 1.64 years at the end of November. With 1.71 years at the end of December, so it's getting a little bit longer with each maturity. This portfolio generally in that neutral range is about 1.8 years, so we're kind of trying to get back up to that direction with the portfolio. And when we talk about maturity, let's drop down one more page and we can look at the maturity distribution.
I want to know why we lost money.
We don't have a lot of bonds. We only have about 7% of the portfolio coming off in the next 180 days.
Quick question, Dave. Sorry.
Yep, sure.
Hi, Dave. Elizabeth Lewis. On the recap of securities held in government agencies, it looks like we did have an unrealized loss of 2,000. It's not a lot, but what would that be accountable for?
All those unrealized losses are just movements in interest rates. So you see the portfolio overall has a $30,000 gain. But we may have some agencies that we bought during the pandemic, which may have a little bit lower return. Although I will tell you in this portfolio, we don't have all the yields are in that 4% area or above. There are 2 securities within the portfolio that have a 3.99 yield to maturity. And so this portfolio is really in pretty good shape. However, interest rates have been, as I pointed out, that yield curve graph, been going up. And they've been going up slightly in terms of the last month or so. And as those interest rates go up, then we can see some unrealized losses within the portfolio. And we saw a lot of that when interest rates rose coming out of the pandemic. Keep in mind that in the pandemic, the 2-year treasury was paying 20 basis points or, roughly 0.25% at one point. So we saw a lot of those unrealized losses as interest rates rose. Now the portfolio overall is at that gain of 33,000. But if interest rates start to rise, we might see that get wiped away. Keep in mind, those unrealized losses go away if we hold all the securities to maturity, which is almost always our intention. We haven't sold a security in this portfolio for probably 8 years, 9 years, something like that. So it's been a long time. So yes, there can be gains in the portfolio. There can be some securities with unrealized losses, and that's basically just based on interest rate movements. If we start to see a lot of inflation coming back from the incoming president's policies, we might see more of that. We might see a little bit more of that as the portfolio tries to catch up with current market rates in terms of if rates go higher, you have to wait for those securities to mature and then put them into higher bonds. But the overall yield on this portfolio right now is 4.45. So that's pretty attractive right now, especially given the fact that we haven't seen that kind of rate in 15 years.
Wow.
Hope that helps.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Let's drop down to that maturity distribution on the next slide. Like I said, you can see not a lot of securities coming off within the next 6 months. And actually, I think that's pretty good because we're going to have a better feeling for what's going to happen with the incoming president's policies and whether or not they're going to be inflationary, probably getting a pretty good idea by June or July. And in fact, the market doesn't expect any sort of Federal Reserve move, even though there's meetings coming up during that entire time period until maybe mid-year. So I think the Federal Reserve's on hold for another 6 months or so, waiting to see what these policies are and whether or not they are going to be inflationary. Look, our general expectation is for interest rates to probably start to drift lower towards the latter half of this year, but we're vigilant. We've got to be vigilant because if these policies start to create inflation, there could be a reversal from the Federal Reserve, and they could keep the current policy rates on hold for a lot longer, or they could even, if they reverse policy, they really do start to see a big pickup inflation, they could reverse policy and raise interest rates again. So that's a possibility. But you can see we've got this maturity distribution out, typical bell curve distribution. We want to keep the average duration in this portfolio about 1.8 years. That's why you have the peak of the maturity distribution right around that 1 to 2 year area, skewed a little bit longer than that in that having a tail in the 2 to 3 year area as well. So that's just kind of the positioning for the portfolio. We're trying to get it to be a little bit longer, and we'd like to see it be a little bit longer than it is because our general expectation is that interest rates are going to be lower, but we're cautious. That's why we don't have it a lot longer, even maybe out to that 2 year area. Because at 1.6, there's a possibility we could start to see inflation coming in with the new policies, and we're reflective because that would in fact increase those unrealized losses. And so we have to be vigilant about that. And with that, I'll take a pause and just take a moment to find out if anyone has any more questions about, sort of our general strategy right now.
I have a question.
Please go ahead, Stacy.
So when we were talking about the corporate bonds, government agencies, government bonds, you said there's a law that requires it's no more than 30% held in corporate bonds?
Correct.
How
True. Yep.
is that evaluated? Like if the stock
53
market goes crazy and we all of a sudden our value doubles, do we have to sell or to keep it at 30%? Or like, how does this work functionally?
Well, the statute is California Code 53601, which requires you to only be in fixed income securities, can't buy any equities, and they have to be higher quality fixed income securities. So they can be treasuries unlimited, government agencies that also have the same sort of rating, unlimited, or corporate bonds that are A or better rated, and those are limited to 30% of the portfolio. None of the securities in the portfolio can be longer than 5 years to maturity.
Okay.
And that is a direct result of what happened in Orange County, these 30 years ago. Because of the losses, the legislature passed the law to restrict the maturity of the securities and the quality of the securities. And so that's the type of portfolio that we're using right now.
So Dave, from a practical perspective, how does that work when securities go over that 30% mark? What happens?
Well, first of all, we try not to do that because we have a pre-trade compliance system so that if I want to put in a purchase above 30%, the system would automatically tell me, give me a message that says, hey, you can't go above 30% in this portfolio. That's a statute. Then we have another layer beyond me. Suppose I tried to override that and get it through the system and put it through anyways. And we have another portfolio. We have what we call a 4I principle, which is that another portfolio has to approve the trade that I've put into the portfolio, and they would see the warning. That if they ignore the warning too and force that portfolio trade into the portfolio, that would go to the compliance people. And the compliance people, as it would settle the next day, would come back and said, hey, you're in violation. You were only supposed to have 30% of this portfolio in corporate bonds. What are you doing? And we would either have to correct that asset allocation and immediately, or we would have a compliance violation, which they would have to contact the client to let them know that we're in violation of the policy.
So I guess, we were just kind of discussing this, that you were answering the question in regards to adding to the portfolio and getting, not being able to. But what if the portfolio itself has made so much money that it, generates more than 30%? Then it's been such a good investment. You've left it in there and it makes a lot of money and it shows that it's over 30%. Are we forced to sell at that point?
Where it says it's just based on purchases.
It's only based on purchases?
On the amount
The-
that you just-
Yeah, let me go back and think about the statute. That's called a passive violation.
A
So
passive-
passive violation would be
I do that.
those percentage allocations. It's called a passive violation. So, we haven't done anything actively, but the portfolio has grown so much in value that and corporates have grown more in value than the agencies, and therefore it's a violation. Now, the statute itself says that the violation only takes place on this percentage at the time of purchase. So you can't have a passive violation under that statute.
Got it.
And so therefore you're not forced to sell if you have a passive violation. But next time it comes out and there's a maturity, then the next time you go to purchase, you can't violate the 30%. Does that help?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and Dave, as the lawyer in the room, or one of them actually, could you give me the code, which California code is that citation to?
It's 53601.
No, but which code? Civic code, government code?
Government code.
It's called
Government code.
California Government Code
That's it.
53601. That's how I know it.
Got it. Thank you.
And then real quick, Dave,
Sure.
and then the other part is, the A-rated for medium-term notes. If for some reason, as we're holding a note and the rating changes, we also have the option, if that comes up, we can sell the medium-term note, correct?
That's absolutely true, Robert, as well. So they have to be A or better. So that allows you to go down to what they call A- or A3 if it's by Moody's, and S&P does it A-. So it's the bottom of that category. However, if a security does, and it has to be rated by just one, that rating, but we try to get it rated by more than one, so that we have a little protection there. Now, as Robert pointed out, sometimes you get what we call euphemistically credit migration, and that migration can be downward. We haven't seen that in a while. And in fact, right now, the economy is doing so well and these corporations are doing so well, we're getting credit migration and it's upward. But you know, during the great financial crisis, we had credit migrations and they were downward. And the policy as it is written and the statute allows us to, again, it's at the time of purchase. So if have a choice, then all right, gee, this security got downgraded. You know, we're not a forced seller. The forced seller is the worst situation that you would have. You don't want to be a forced seller. You want to say, look, IBM got downgraded, and they're now triple B, and this is not the case. But if they were, we think IBM's still going to be around for another year and a half until this bond matures, and we want to hold on to it because we don't want to have to take a loss at the moment. If you're at a gain, you might say, all right, look, we're at a gain. Let's take the gain, roll out of this, and buy something that it has a better credit rating. But you don't want to be a forced seller and have to take a loss, and the statute gives you enough room, and the policy gives you enough room to do that.
So, whoops. Dave, this is Ann again. This has all been very, very helpful, and we generally try to wrap up our meetings by 4 p.m. I'm just wondering, were there any other pearls of wisdom that you'd like to give us? And then I'll make sure there are no questions.
No, I mean, we have good corporate holdings are on probably the next page down. One of the things we try and pride ourselves on corporate holdings is you're going to recognize every name in there. You've got John Deere, Apple, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Home Depot, American Honda, Toyota, JP Morgan. So you're talking about the biggest banks in the country in there. And we've got a piece of Pfizer holding. So this doesn't give the ratings. The ratings are in lower part of the statement. But, I just would encourage you that, these aren't names that you won't recognize. And that's one of the things we kind of pride ourselves on is we know that not everyone understands or knows these names, and there can be more obscure names, but we want to make sure that what we've got in the portfolio people recognize and from being non-financial people. And those are all the ratings down below, probably in the GASB 40 report. And really, that's it. I mean, my news is that the economy's doing well. Employment looks good. Inflation link is coming down. It's paused recently, but we're cautious. We're a little bit cautious as to what's going to go on with the new administration because we don't really know. And if people tell you they really know what's going to happen, I don't think that's true because I don't think anyone really knows exactly how this is going to play out. And so, we're trying to be as measured, as on guard as we can be coming up in the next 6 months. I think within the next 6 months, we're going to know more and, be happy to come back in 6 months and talk to you about this again.
That sounds great. Are there any further questions for Dave? Robert, did we ask Dave to take a look at our investment policy? Is that just?
Yeah, he did. And just as staff mentioned, there's no recommendation currently on the policy. It's just we bring it back for review for the committee and the committee just makes a recommendation.
So from your standpoint and Dave's standpoint, we're good with the way it is. Okay,
I would like to make a comment.
sure.
It's a little different than your feeling, Ann. I think the philosophy that you just put out may go to the lowest common denominator. You're looking for names that everybody recognizes. I'm not sure whether that's really the best investment strategy. That's just my feeling.
But we have to be particularly safe and
Right.
by statute. So I agree. My portfolio is made up almost entirely of high technology stocks. Many are not household names. Was doing well.
A lot of
And,
AI.
and that can be a great personal strategy, and I hear you on that. That's a great personal strategy, and you're probably going to get better gains that way. Here, it's
It's the
just a
rating.
different mentality. You
Sure.
just,
No, and it should be. It should be.
it should
Okay.
be. It's
Thank you so
taxpayer
much.
dollars, you know?
Thank you so
Correct.
much, Dave. I hope next time you won't be on jury duty and we'll actually get to see you here in person.
Me too. Me too. Thanks so much. Thanks for
Okay.
having me.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it. Yeah, I
Bye-bye.
think the only thing is just make a motion just to, no changes to the,
And
Accept his report,
yeah, accept the report and no changes to the
investment.
investment
right,
policy.
okay. But, okay, I get
Sorry
that
about
we
that.
should vote on the investment policy, but do we vote on his report or that was just information?
No, it was just informational
Okay.
and then, yeah.
Well, are there any comments or questions on the investment policy? I know you asked one earlier,
Yeah.
which I think has been answered.
Yeah. I think it is.
Anybody else? Sun is really coming in.
Yeah.
All right, well, I think I can do this. I move to recommend to the council that we continue the statement of investment policy as written and make no changes at the present time. May I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Wally. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
All right.
Any opposed? Any abstain? Sorry, it's getting late. All right, motion is approved unanimously. And with that, oh, wait, we do have just really, really quick. Future agenda topics. So I guess I'd ask you, Tom, do you think that March would be a good time for the report from you and Bob or not yet on the CalPERS, the stuff you're doing?
Yes, although what we need to do, I guess, is try to put some pressure on CalPERS to give us the information we've requested. Nothing's happened on that that I know of.
Okay,
But Bob, are you still on the line?
looks like it. Bob, can you unmute? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm unmuted now. I didn't have control over that button. Yeah, we can do it in March. Robert, I've followed up with Robert several times on getting the information that Tom and I want from CalPERS. Basically, they're stonewalling us. Robert, you may say otherwise, but I think we can continue to lobby that, and I also think we can get Tom and I can play with this tool to provide savings estimates based on discretionary contributions, but I would want to have that in writing from CalPERS. And I think a good time to consider doing that contribution is in the March, April timeframe, because we'll be through the mid-year budget review, so we'll know exactly what shape the general fund is, which I'm expecting it to be very good. And so it'd be a good time to put that money to use and save us the 6-point-something%, as opposed to just sitting around in LAIF earning 4.3, I think it is right now. So we could definitely discuss that in March.
Okay, that sounds great. So Robert, if you'll put that on our agenda for March. And the only other thing I had was, we were discussing before we started the meeting that both Davika and I, our term ends June 30th, I think it is technically at the end of this fiscal year, because we both serve 2 full terms. So we are going to have 2 vacancies, and we really want to find some great folks to come onto this committee. I personally am going to reach out to Steve Brickley. I don't know if Steve's still on, but he has been very interested in this committee. He's attended many of our meetings by Zoom and has asked great questions. So I will definitely make sure he's aware of the openings and can put in an application. I've also been encouraging Bob, but he says he wants to finish his business on the planning committee first. So when he gets off the planning committee, then we can try and get him back on. But please reach out if you have friends who live in Atherton and you think would be good on this committee. Get them to send in their applications. We'd love to have more applications than we have space for. Anything else? Okay, I say the meeting's adjourned at 4:08 PM. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice job.